Hey guys, HorologyMan here, today with another short review of another great timepiece. Today I will be reviewing the Rolex Submariner 16610. A lot of people call this piece the Classic Submariner, and quite rightly so. The reason why we call it the Classic Submariner is essentially because the 16610 is no longer the current rendition of the Submariner line, in that Rolex has discontinued the 16610 quite a while ago, and the current rendition of the Submariner is essentially the 1166-610, of which a lot of people also know by the name the Ceramic Submariner. Now we call the Ceramic Sub essentially because the new Sub sports a ceramic bezel, which the Classic Sub does not have. The Classic Sub sports an aluminum bezel. But I think the major difference between the two also lay in the case design and the case construction. The Ceramic Sub has a different case construction. I would say it has wider lugs and probably thicker lugs as well, a thicker case. I can't confirm this for sure, and I don't actually know if the actual technical size differences between the two in regards to case diameter, but certainly the design of the new Sub gives it a much more bigger and a much more thicker look compared to the Classic Sub. The Classic Sub has a much more, as you can see here, in regards to lug and the case itself, a sharper and a thinner look. It looks much more slick compared to the Ceramic Sub. Now, I've tried both pieces. I mean, I own the Classic Sub, and I've also tried the Ceramic Sub at the authorized dealers. And I have to say that the Ceramic Sub has a bigger presence on the wrist, in that it really does wear bigger compared to the Classic Sub. Again, I emphasize, I don't actually think there are any size differences between the two in regards to case diameter. But essentially the case design is different in that it kind of adopts a much more thicker, more rugged, bigger look. I suppose that's in line with the norm nowadays with watches. You know, bigger is better. A lot of watchmakers are going into bigger designs. I suppose it's a trend nowadays. But at the same time, with the release of the Ceramic Sub and the discontinuation of the 16610, a common theme has risen in recent times as to whether the 16610 is still relevant today. Now, this especially arises when one is considering purchasing a Sub and adding a Sub into their collection when they've never had a Sub before and they want a Sub, and they're pursuing it at the secondhand market, and they're considering whether to either go for the Classic Sub or the Ceramic Sub, and they wonder whether the Classic Sub is still relevant given that it's an outdated model. And essentially in this review, I'd like to deal with that. And my answer to that is essentially yes, the Classic Sub is still very relevant today. Now, a quick search online, and or perhaps inquire with secondhand dealer, and you will quickly find out that the value, the price for the Classic Sub is actually very similar, almost the same to the price of the Ceramic Sub. And this is really amazing given that this model has really been in existence for, I think, nearly a decade now, but yet it's really retained its value for so long. That by itself is a reflection that a lot of collectors still value it very much. Another thing I tend to notice as well with regards to the Sub debate, the old versus new, is that, especially on the forum, is that a lot of people, they either like the new Ceramic Sub or they don't. And I suppose that the same applies to the Classic Sub. Some people like it, some people don't. Now, I'm not here to say which one is better and which one's worse. It's really a preferential thing. Personally, though, I chose the Classic Sub. I purchased this piece secondhand about 3 years ago. I could have easily chosen the Ceramic Sub at secondhand prices as well, but I chose this piece, and it's fine. It really does depend on your preferential taste. The major difference, I guess, in terms of the feel is that the Classic Sub looks smaller and wears smaller. And personally for me, it looks classier. Not to say that the ceramic sub isn't classy. It's just, for example, with AP watches, the bigger Royal Oaks, they look good, but it's indeed the old and the vintage pieces that I like, that are in line with a classier feel, in my opinion. But I think the greatest asset, the greatest thing about the sub that makes it a worthy watch for a lot of collectors, and I suppose this applies to also the ceramic sub, given that it's quite similar in design, given that it's a continuation, is that the Submariner is the epitome of versatility. The Submariner is versatile in every sense of the word. Now, I say this because I've seriously worn this watch, and it's perfect to be worn in all sorts of occasions and situations, and really so. For example, I constantly wear this watch in a very professional setting in regards to my work. I wear it often. I wear it with my suit, and oh my god, it does complement a suit perfectly. It's not exactly a dress watch, it's a sports watch, but it fits perfectly. I guess it's almost conventional as well, because it's quite common for a lot of people to wear a sub with a suit, and it's also very recognizable. Now, this by itself, I think, also is also a benefit in the business context, in that now, I'm not saying that watches are important for business or fundamental or a necessity, but that sometimes you should sport a good timepiece as a reflection of how you are doing in business when you're dealing with business context. And the sub is perfect for that, because it's not an overstatement. It doesn't scream I have big bugs, but at the same time it's a reasonable timepiece. It's not too pricey, it's not too expensive, it's not too blingy. It's also not an overstatement. It's really, really good, perfectly balanced in the business context. It's also very recognizable. I've had certain people I've met who've complimented me on the sub. It's instantly recognizable. I suppose, given that it's such an amazing and also a well-known piece, a well-known Rolex watch. But it's also versatile in the sense that I've also worn this watch in rugged activities. I've done mountain climbing with it, I've swam with it, I've done sports with it. I've seriously beat up this watch pretty badly. I bought it for the purpose of it being a daily beater, and I've not babied it at all. And if you look at it carefully, you can see some swirlies and scratches. But it's really held up so well. It's really taken a beating, but held up so well. The only noticeable damage, I would say, lies on the bezel. If you can see, I can show it to you over here. But essentially a dent in the bezel. And given that the bezel is aluminum, that's expected because it's quite weak. Now, the good news for you guys is that the aluminum bezel of the Classic Sub is actually really cheap to replace. I've not replaced it yet, but I've gone around on eBay and I've looked around, and the prices are really reasonable actually to get a replacement bezel. And also I've spoken to my watchsmith, who told me that a lot of watchsmiths, they can source it as well quite easily. Whereas on the other hand, with the ceramic subs, given that it's the ceramic bezel, one of its major selling points, and also how sophisticated it is, it's not necessarily as easy to replace the bezel, and perhaps not as cheaply as well. I would expect the bezel to be more costly as well to replace. I've not myself seen any offerings on eBay for these ceramic bezels yet, so I assume it's also hard to source. So, in regards to rugged activities, this watch is also perfect for it. I think one of the major reasons why the scratches they really blend they really blend so well into the watch is because of the brushed nature of the watch. It's really brushed up almost in all the major aspects of the watch. Therefore, any scratches you get, you don't really see it. So, for example, you could be playing tennis for a second, and 2 seconds later you could take a shower, change, put on your suit, and the watch will look great. It seriously is one for any sort of occasion. And I've even worn it on a lazy afternoon on a Sunday with a t-shirt and a slack, and it still looks good. It really does, apologize for that, really does complement all sorts of situations. This by itself, I think, is the main reason why all collectors should consider a sub, because essentially this is one of those watches where you can buy and you can wear it almost every day for any sort of setting. If you don't want to rotate, you even don't have, you probably don't have to put any mind into it. You just pop it on and it will look good on anything, and it will fit any purpose. So it's not only an aesthetic thing that you get, aesthetic value, it's also the practicality. It just fits with everything. But another reason I think is also the historical importance of the sub. The classic sub, is the quintessential dive watch. This is the watch that revolutionized dive watch design. All the dive watches since this watch, after this, and all the generations that have come so far, they've all been inspired largely, or maybe to an extent, either aesthetically or technically, been inspired by the classic sub's design. They share many of the similar features. For example, if I will just take off my Omega Seamaster, which I'm wearing here, the modern one, you will see the many similarities between the watches. But again, the difference being, it also contains many differences from many modern dive watches today. Specifically, that it is a very understated watch, and in a sense, I think it has a much more classy feel to it, in the sense that it's also very minimalist. It's not too complicated. The only complication you have here is the date complication, but really that's all you need. So, for those of you out there considering getting a sub, adding a sub to your collection, now you can of course choose a ceramic one, but essentially what I've tried to say in this review is that the classic sub is also a sub that you shouldn't pass up. It's still relevant today. But either way, the Submariner watch is definitely a great watch, a great timepiece, and certainly a worthy addition to your collection. I hope you guys have enjoyed this short review, and if you have any further questions or requests, please submit a comment below and I'll tend to it.